Welcome back. Oh, God, those lights. Mind you, I feel sorry for you. You're probably getting just as bright a light off the top of my head. No amount of powder can solve that one. So I hope you found the morning sessions and the early afternoon sessions interesting. I hope you had some lunch. I didn't, not really. But I saw other people having lunch, so I'm very happy for you. So there is one more customer presentation, followed by the supporting partner, which in this case is Accenture. And then after that will be breakouts, and then after that, beer. So not long to go now. I know it's a very, very long day. So I'd like to introduce, first of all, Axel Biere from Ahold. Ahold is a very large retailer, and they're going to tell you their story with ServiceNow, and then we're going to invite up Accenture to talk about how they work together on this project. Okay, Alex.
Hi, my name is Axel Biere. I'm from the Netherlands. I hate soccer. And I want to take you through a journey we did as Ahold with Accenture. This is my first time presenting for such a large audience, so please bear with me. Ahold, for those of you who don't know Ahold, it's a very large retail organization based in the Netherlands. We also have a large footprint in the US, Czech, Germany, and Belgium. It's very large. We have in the Netherlands around 1,000 Albert Heijn shops, 500 Gal & Gal shops which sell liquor, and 500 Ethos shops who do some kind of pharmacy products. The Albert Heijn was founded in 1887 and went public in 1948. We have a multi-supplier outsourced support organization with around 80 suppliers, and of which are 30 of them are the key suppliers. The scope of the presentation, the journey where I want to take you is for the last 2 years, and the scope is the Netherlands and Group IT, which is catering for all the generic IT services for Ahold. To give you an idea of what Ahold is all about, we distribute towards the Albert Heijn, which is just the retail shop, 17 million cases per week, 60 million customers per week. We do 16,000 trips to shops per week, and we have 25,000 delivery moments per week. To give you an idea of the difference of the Netherlands retail with UK, we have no room for stock in the Netherlands. A square meter is more expensive than transporting the goods day in, day out, 2-3 times a day towards a shop. So you can imagine that the IT behind that, the data warehouse behind that is big, and if it breaks down, it is immediately visible in the IT or in the business. The shelves are empty. So when we started our journey, I will go to the next slide. We had, like in the examples of SIAM, we had multiple suppliers. It was organically grown over time. Big silos, it was mentioned this morning. 80+ suppliers, multiple IT service management tools, no link between processes, contracts, KPIs, you name it, we did it. So we had a challenge. We put somewhere in the middle, we put ServiceNow, and we set a very simple ambition. We wanted a single source of truth, and we wanted, as a start, be able to present the same reports as our suppliers. So for instance, for problem, for change management. But we wanted one layer on top of that. We wanted to be able to aggregate it towards an application and towards business area, which was lacking at the moment. So, yep, that's working. So after that, the end situation is that we now have the integrated landscape. We have migrated all our processes into ServiceNow. We interfaced with the service management tool of our various suppliers, and we now have a single facing IT organization towards the business via the how did I call it this morning, the IT shop in there, the structured workflows. We also use that. In the middle there was the CMDB. And I will go through that in the next slides. So if you look at the changes we did from a run perspective, we had reports from our various vendors, but we had no clue on what was the impact on a business application or a business area. We had no uniform processes, so it was very difficult to determine the impact. After our implementation, we're now able to deliver our services with more transparency. We know when we have an incident, what was the impact on a certain business area, and we have a seamless integration cross-supplier towards our business. So if our business orders a telephone or a laptop, or even from IT request changes in a firewall, it's just one portal. And there are many, many suppliers behind that. The link in between is continuously is the CMDB. With that CMDB and all the processes in place, we are now, for the first time in history, we're able to determine cross-supplier, cross-contract, to determine what's the impact of a change. We know what suppliers we hit via the CMDB, we know how to prioritize, and we even know if multiple changes hit the same configuration items, application or business areas. The CMDB enables this everywhere. Yeah. I'm sorry for the slides, I'm very confused with the screens downstairs here. Okay. We started out with a very simple idea, is that we wanted to have a single source of truth and being able to create the same reports as the suppliers. And we wanted to aggregate that towards application and business level. What happened in the meantime is that when we had that data, we were like, well, if we put in the contracts in there, and we know the line items per contract, and we use the CMDB, we can do cost modeling. And that's what we did. If you look at the cost model we have now, and we made a split between fixed cost and variable cost, we can now do business cases. So every project, we know how many machines they're putting in there, how much middleware, databases. We know the cost involved. We can determine what's the cost in there. We even know what business area we're impacting. If you look at cost control, we have a 4-weekly bill coming in every 4 weeks, and we can link that to our CMDB. We know what we're paying for, so we know the orphans, as we call them, in our database. If we do decommissioning, we can track that. If you look at patch management, or what we call lifecycle management, keeping your infrastructure on a current level, we can track and trace that in our CMDB. We've earmarked our lifecycle management program for a year in our CMDB. We can track that. What we're working on right now, which is the biggest challenge, is harmonizing our contracts. So we have multiple contracts, we have various definitions of incident, problem, change, throughput times. This needs to be harmonized. We're working on that. And just to give you an idea, all the KPI service levels are also in ServiceNow, linked to the CMDB, linked to a supplier, everything is in there. So, where do we go from here? Basically, we focused on getting in control of all the figures we have. We have achieved that. We were really happy with the reports that were in ServiceNow up until that moment. And after that, we were basically enabling our retained organization to manage end-to-end. And what happens then is that you want to proactively steer. Well, sorry to say, but the current reports in ServiceNow will not enable you to do that, so you need something else. Right now, as we speak, we're implementing the performance analytics, and we want to be able to steer on what's the workload with our suppliers, what's happening with the throughput time of an incident, or you call it a lead time. And ultimately, we want to be able to see whether we're ready for a Christmas peak. As you can imagine, with our logistic process, it is a nightmare if anything goes down. and the shelves will be empty. So we're looking into that. We also want to know what's the impact of a new campaign, and that's why we implemented performance analytics. Next. It's a very high-level story. It was a very impressive journey, 2 years. And what I wanted to give you all is the lessons learned from Ahold. The first one, standardize your solutions. The easiest takeaway I can give you is don't try to seamlessly integrate the workflow cross process, cross IT service management tool. Look at the process and the workflow from your vendor as a black box. Only focus on the touch points. And if you focus on that, it will be easier to maintain. Also focus on maintainability. You can only do it once. For incident management, we right now have 4 or 5 interfaces. So that means your first instance of an interface must be spot on. Because if you have 5 interfaces, you will not be able to change it, because you will have to change them all 5. Keep it simple. Eliminate all the, sorry for the word, bullshit. Leave it out of it. Focus on the essential parts. Start with the end in mind. We started with the configuration management database. We looked at all the data we had. The biggest challenge we had is we wanted to aggregate that data on application level and business level. Start with the CMDB. We started with basically 0 configuration items in our configuration management database. It took us a year, and we now have 95% coverage all the time. So from data center to machine to database middleware to application, it's 95%, it's in place. Every process we've set up is linked to the CMDB. It's the only way you can aggregate your data towards application or business level. Start with the end in mind. So when you start, make sure is that you have your structure of your CMDB in place. You will not be able to change it. Third one, manage all aspects of the change, your people, process, technology. We did a huge change within Ahold, and we did it with a very small team. We had people on board. One of them is sitting there, Rasit Tastepe from Accenture. He's now blushing. We were all ITIL experts, and we were all ex-developers, ex-project managers, so we had all the skills on board. And luckily within Ahold, we have a couple of ITIL experts. Even one of them was an examinator for ITIL 2 exam, so he was a real bastard. We were able to take all the decisions, and we were really agile in determining what was necessary and push forward. So that's the key takeaway. Don't go into endless discussions, put the right people in place, and give them the power to take the decision, push it forward. The platform will enable it. That's basically it.
Thank you, Axel. So, as you've heard, an interesting story of how to enable a complex multi-sourced environment with ServiceNow, but also with a whole bunch of stuff which goes around ServiceNow. And as you can see, Axel and his team have done a great job. But mastering service integration and management is not easy. Taking Axel's example, if you've got a multi-sourced ecosystem with 80 service providers, all with their own tools, all with their own different ways of working, all with their own commercial constructs. Despite everybody saying we're ITIL compliant, you're pretty sure it's going to be a recipe for disaster without some level of control around this. And despite the perceived benefits of selective multi-sourcing, we see this all the time. The benefits of labor arbitrage through offshoring, the benefits of innovation because organizations are specialists, whether it be in infrastructure or applications. And these are all the things that the industry bought into as we went down the selective multi-sourcing dream. But how many of you have seen this? The all SLAs are green, but the business is dissatisfied. We see it all the time, and in the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about some of the things that we're seeing more broadly across the industry, particularly around this concept of SIAM and everything as a service. So what makes up a good service integration and management functions? Well, 5 key components worth calling out. Number 1, too often we see organizations that start on these SIAM journeys, and they really are focused on almost exclusively on vendor management. They're looking down rather than looking up. We strongly believe that the successful implementations of SIAM that we've seen are those which start with the business first, and everything flows back from that. Making sure that you've got the right level of dialogue with the business is absolutely fundamental to making sure that IT is both high-performing and relevant. Contractual frameworks or even contractual constraints maybe. So as Axel talked about, the amount of work which goes into institutionalizing, put my teeth back in, contracts that you've already agreed with your third-party suppliers and making sure that they all join up in order to deliver those business needs is another absolute fundamental. Now, it's not to be underestimated how difficult that is, particularly when selective multi-sourcing has often started off as we might outsource infrastructure, and then a couple of years later we outsource some applications. And so this kind of fragmented approach to outsourcing has created tension and issues around joining things up and delivering real business value. Tooling. I would be remiss to have this conversation at a ServiceNow event if I didn't mention tooling. But if we take a step back from the tool itself, I think there are bigger strategic questions to answer. I heard an example in one of the sessions this morning where a SIAM vendor had told his entire ecosystem of service providers, you shall use my tool. And that is certainly a strategic decision. We see the complete spectrum from you shall use my tool through to we're happy for you to integrate into my tool, or even you bring along your tool and we'll use it, and the implications around who owns the data when you decide to substitute one of your multi-source providers. So clearly making sure that you have a strategy for tooling. Do you understand what your architecture is that you're building, and how can your ecosystem of service providers bring the right tools to enable you with success? These are all key components of effective SIAM functions. The next area is around innovation. I said earlier about one of the perceived benefits of selective outsourcing was finding organizations that specialize in the management of componentry or technology. And lo and behold, some of these organizations are global organizations. In fact, Accenture is one of them. But how often do we hear people say, when I outsourced to your company, I expected you to bring some innovation. And the answer is, we were too busy trying to keep the lights on rather than bringing you innovation. So again, in these successful SIAM functions, we see organizations that can harness and institutionalize innovation. One good idea in a multi-source tower can become a great idea across the whole ecosystem, and really driving vendors, partners, to play a key role in bringing innovative ideas and sharing. This is more than best practice, right? This is the implementation of new thinking and new concepts in order to be relevant to the business. This isn't self-serving. This isn't about being good for IT's sake. This is about making sure that we can shift the needle in terms of business value. The fifth area of successful SIAM functions is probably the most important one. Too often we see an organization which hasn't considered all of the key components to be a successful SIAM function. You really need a blueprint which caters for all of these key components. We see organizations where the SIAM function doesn't have a service relationship manager, or even multiple service relationship managers facing off against business units. We see service integration and management functions where the service transition capability sits outside the walls of SIAM. If we accept that service transition is a sensible thing to put within the walls of SIAM, what about service design? How far back through the service lifecycle should we be going in order to try and create a single coordinated capability which joins up all of the multi-sourced ecosystem, whether they be internal or external to the service provider, to deliver real business value? I think IT governance, risk, and compliance has been a recurring theme of today. In a multi-sourced environment, governance, risk, and compliance is not the sole responsibility of any one partner. So having a function which explicitly includes some of these management capabilities is absolutely necessary. And the diagram really just represents, what we see all too often, which is a jigsaw puzzle which is missing some of the key areas. So where can ServiceNow enable SIAM? Well, actually, there's a number of different ways where I think ServiceNow is can be a critical component of overall SIAM success. A clear, obvious example is around the service catalog. In a multi-sourced environment, presenting a single point of contact or a window for customers to interact with IT is obvious, right? We see organizations doing this all the time. But the workflow in the background to make sure that tasks are performed either in series or parallel in order to ensure that tasks are delivered fast, right, cheap, and easy, right? These are the things which are difficult, and the tool provides you with the capabilities to do this, but the thinking and the management effort to join up your ecosystem is where we see a lot of effort required. I mentioned earlier about the difficulties of multi-sourced environments and some of the constraints around contracts. ServiceNow's vendor performance management module, I think, could play a very interesting role in this in future. The ability to instantiate or even institutionalize your contracts through vendor scorecards is certainly a very good idea. The ability to plug into all of the data which already exists within the ServiceNow platform, is the stuff that we dreamed of about 10 years ago. But how can you align that day-to-day performance of your vendors with what's in the contractual frameworks, and the amount of effort and work that's involved to try and demystify, a contract of 80 pages with your infrastructure provider and really instantiate it in a way which gives continuity between true day-to-day service performance in a way that the customers understand versus what we wrote down in a contract, maybe many moons ago. The other area which I think is going to grow more and more, certainly in the next 1 to 2 years, is as I mentioned earlier, this IT governance, risk, and compliance. As I mentioned, it isn't just one organization's remit to take control of IT governance, risk, and compliance, particularly in a multi-sourced environment, but the challenge becomes everyone's responsibility quickly becomes no one's responsibility. Using things like ServiceNow's IT GRC module will provide the ability to automate and institutionalize policies, guidelines, standards, all of these compliance things which are absolutely fundamental to corporate governance, but actually move from a scenario where you're looking back 1 month to tell you, were we compliant last month? We've been to organizations where it takes 4 people, 20 man days to generate an 80-page compliance report. We believe that you should be moving from that model to almost near real-time compliance activity and action today. I want to look at something now and say, which of my control objectives are red? What am I going to do to positively improve those things right here, right now? How am I going to automate those things? I think one area where we're going to see a lot of change in the next couple of years is this topic of analytics. You've probably heard a lot about analytics over, and the buzz around analytics. I think the concept of service management analytics is going to be one that every person in this room will need to have a point of view on. The ability to harness big data and the cloud, even artificial intelligence or cognitive learning capabilities. These are all tools that like I said, we dreamt about many years ago, but now we have the ability to join up all of this data and try and make sense of it. Service management professionals are in an unparalleled position to have the legitimate get those teeth back in again. The legitimate mandate to take an active interest in data from multiple sources, whether it be application logs, whether it be incident data, whether it be configuration management data, service cost data, et cetera, et cetera. Imagine a world where service management professionals are using analytics to solve for interesting scenarios like what is the correlation between the number of emergency changes we make and major incidents we have? What is the probability that this particular change is going to result in a business impact major outage? These are all the sorts of things which, we now have the tools and techniques in order to enable us to do this. I think this is an area where the ServiceNow product will probably develop over the next few years, but certainly the fact that all of the data, or certainly a huge portion of the data sources to come up with those answers, already sits on a single integrated platform, and there in its own right is a degree of power which we probably haven't had in history before now. So based on what we're seeing in the market, our research and development team has been working on what we call the Accenture Service Integration Bus. Now, this is a concept of, instead of building multiple point-to-point interfaces, the ability to create a single one-to-many interface where people can plug in. So in a multi-sourced environment where we've got, say, 80 service providers, actually providing them with one single interface which they plug into means you only have to manage that one interface. So the ability to really enable SIAM and multiple sourcing constructs through some kind of integration bus is certainly where we see the market moving over the next few years. And where we are at the moment is in an interesting position of actually deploying and rolling out these modules and scaling them out for some of the capabilities which you'll see in Fuji and various other versions. So hopefully that's given you a bit of insight into where we see the market moving in terms of service integration and management and some of the key things to look for. Many of you will be working in a multi-sourced environment, and hopefully some of the things I've said will resonate with you. But what about this thing, everything as a service? So, this morning you would have heard ServiceNow's view of everything as a service. I think some of the interesting things at a more macro level is large incumbents really need to untether themselves from the reliance on human capital. Now, that might sound a bit grand, but the reality is, in order to grow in this modern market, we need to move away from being reliant on humans. And I think the move to structured messaging rather than the I can't remember the phrase earlier, but it was the e-business dance or something like that, right? Untethering ourselves from human capital is going to be one of the ways that organizations grow. And these are real things that are happening out there in the economy. But also, with some of those business threats come technology-enabled opportunities. So, as I mentioned earlier, automation, analytics, artificial intelligence, mobile, all of these things mean that the technology-enabled opportunities are actually part of the way of solving some of these business threats. So senior executives from any service-based function, whether it be IT, whether it be marketing, are all now starting to think about how can they differentiate based on buying or selling things as a service. And our as-a-service stack includes a whole bunch of things. It ranges from infrastructure as a service all the way up to business process as a service. So you see organizations, so think PayPal, for example, right? Business process as a service. You can plug into PayPal. It digitizes the way that you do electronic cash transactions. You can plug into software as a service, and we all know that because of ServiceNow. You can plug into infrastructure as a service, and many of you will be familiar with Amazon Web Services. But the power of "and" is the ability to provide as-a-service offerings that bring together multiple technology-enabled opportunities. And those things include the ability to plug in. You want to be able to plug in quickly. Scalability, I want to start small and grow fast. Standardization, I want a single interface so I don't have to keep configuring and changing things. Consumption-based, I only want to pay for what I use. Outcome-orientated, I want to buy outcomes. I don't want to worry about the bits and the bytes. I want you as a service provider to own those outcomes for me. Vendor agnostic, I don't care about the underlying technology for some of these things, but I do care about the ability to plug in seamlessly. So what we're seeing, both with ServiceNow specifically and with ServiceNow as enabler is interesting, right? ServiceNow ticks many of those boxes. You can plug in, it's scalable, it's standardized, but with the precision of being able to customize. You can have it on consumption-based models, vendor agnostic in the way that you plug in. However, but we also see that the concept of buying or selling things as a service means that we have to understand this discipline of service management. All of us in this room are involved in some level of service providers, right? Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be here. So mastering the challenges of multi-sourcing, mastering the challenges of everything as a service, these are the sorts of skills which people in this room are going to need to be able to harness over the next 5 to 10 years. So with that in mind, hopefully I gave you a bit of a flavor of not only some of the great work that's gone on at Ahold, but also giving you some insights into where we see the market going. So thank you very much.